last time I talked about Kids Next Door was the horrible crossover with the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, but for today's video, I'm gonna be reviewing an episode that I was planning to review a long time ago. Probably one of the earlier years when I was reduced to reviewing stuff in front of my in front of my computer screen. And that episode is Operation CAKED 4. And since we're in the month of August where the summer gets hotter and hotter, this episode is the perfect choice. Granted, it's not a beach episode, but at the same time, it's still suitable for a summer episode. Number 1 makes an announcement about the delightful children's birthday coming up tomorrow, where the cake is about to be delivered. But unfortunately, tomorrow is also Tubathon, where number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are gonna participate in the race. They get a message from the delightful children about the cake being the reward of Tubathon if you take first place. So number 1 is willing to join in on Tubathon, and things just gets a lot more interesting from here on out. I like the idea of a tube race being the main focus of this episode, because not only we get to see the race in action itself, but also see what the delightful children along with their father have in store with the kids next door. I gotta say, it's pretty much one of my favorite bits of the entire episode. But since I'm getting way too ahead, I need to talk about number 2 in this episode. You see, number 2 always finishes last in the Tubathon every single year because his tube bestie is really one of the weakest tubes out of all the tubes that are in the race. And the reason why he is always relentless is because his father told him that he always wins with bestie during his childhood years while being part of the Tubathon. I gotta say, with number 2 being somewhat of a main character in this, I gotta say that he actually deserves so much, and in this episode, it really does, because he ends up slowing himself down because of the tube, and the fact that he's relentless into refusing to use because his father actually won so many Tubathons. You can actually feel sympathetic towards number 2, but little did we know, his father mostly lied to his son about winning all the Tubathons. And considering that he was this close into winning the race at the end, only to just head back to where the other kids are at when it comes to the powder bakery of the cake that father is going to use with all the kids inside, which is somewhat dark if you want to take this a bit seriously. It's really, really aggravating. For once, I just want to see a person win the race and also come back to save his friends. I mean, sure, his family members or his friends who aren't into this whole cake situation would probably keep him away from being celebrated, but on the other hand, there's literally no difference since that all the other children are still in danger. And considering that the announcer even apologized to him for calling him the Lord of the Losers, only for him to take that back when he left, I'm pretty sure that number 2 obviously doesn't know what victory is once he wins it fair and square. But getting back to the episode, the tube race itself is the biggest highlight in this entire episode. And considering that there probably isn't any other episode that catered to tube races and more on river races, if you want to count paddling and stuff like that, this episode really knew how to put the tube race and put them into the Codename Kids Next Door formula. Because let's just say that for how much that this show can sometimes be mostly ridiculous at times, I can say that this episode isn't really ridiculous when you add the tube race into the mix. Number 4's demise in this episode, mainly the fact that his tube got destroyed, it's really just desserts for him for how much cocky he is compared to the other characters. Not to mention, he always gets carried away when it comes to other characters around him, mainly number 3. I would feel bad for him for not winning the race, but at the same time, he really deserves it. And I gotta say that he technically got last place, even though they ends up going in third place, while number 2 ends up going in second place, since all the other participants are tied in first place. Sometimes the logic is mostly confusing, since that a 600th tie is actually a thing, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure that they want to give all the participants something after all the stress that they went through when it comes to the Delightful Children and their father wreaking havoc during this whole tube race. Getting into the Delightful Children, who mostly took over the entire tube race just so that they can have the cake to themselves, while also putting everyone else in danger. This is pretty much the worst thing that they ever did to anyone, and that really makes them really good villains. For how much that we've seen these episodes cater to the birthday, and when we get to see them actually use in some other capacity, this isn't the worst defeat that they had in these episodes, but it's really up there when it comes to how much that the other characters managed to win, even though that the cake didn't completely got baked 100%. And the more I think about father completely using the cake battle and the kids together, I gotta say that he's most likely accountable, and even though that this plan is mostly about heating up the cake, the kids will probably be burned to crisp regardless, and I'm still thinking about father being accountable for probably eating all the children, but at the same time, probably the Delightful Children will probably eat the children once they are crisp when it comes to the heat. Granted, this plan isn't as dark as I remembered, but I gotta say, this is honestly a lot more twisted than I give it credit for. And when the Tubathon just keeps getting better and better, it also becomes a lot more complicated for the characters to deal with, that they're gonna be inside of a cake, while also being served to the Delightful Children. I understand that that's probably not the case, but the more you watch this episode and the more you get older, you might understand what this episode is trying to do if the Delightful Children and the father actually win at the end. But since number 2 came back to save everyone from getting cake baked, if he actually won, he will probably still share the cake with all the other contestants, but at the same time, we all know that the cake itself wasn't baked 100%. Don't even know if this is a lose-lose situation for number 1 if he manages to share his reward with other people, since they won't be able to finish it all, but knowing that the cake wasn't fully baked 100%, I don't even know what the ending would have looked like if number 2 actually won, while leading with an amount of cake blather along with so many children destroying destruction in the finish line. Because whether if you take second, third, or any place afterwards, you will still lose regardless. Aside from some of the issues that I've mentioned, I still enjoyed this episode, and it's still one of my favorite cake episodes. Granted, I didn't watch the cake episodes years after watching them, but I'm pretty sure that this episode did something a lot more interesting when it comes to the whole Delightful Children's birthday cake ideal for what this show usually does since it all started back in 2002. Even though I'm not gonna get back to the show in the future since this is occasional, this episode still proves to me that this show, with its terrible crossover with the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, these characters don't need a crossover with anyone when it comes to terrible execution, because this cartoon should have been standalone from beginning to end. Admittedly, the crossover didn't really damage the credibility of Codename Kids Next Door, nor the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, well, aside from the finalization. It still doesn't even make any sense to have these two shows collide, considering that in Cartoon Network there are other shows, even during that time at the end of 2007, would have been better off having a crossover with each other. But then again, that was almost 15 years ago, or 14 years ago, so I'm pretty sure that for what we had back then, it's just gonna be a piece of history. I give this episode a 7.75 out of 10.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole crew.